Hi, it's Ian Bremmer, and I am back in New York, as most of you know, I'm going to give this live streaming thing a try yet again. I haven't quite figured out if I like it or not, but you guys can give me some feedback, specifically to talk about the refugee issue, which I've been thinking about for quite a while now. Let me start big picture. I think that the European refugee crisis will ultimately prove much greater, much more damaging, much more problematic, and much more destabilizing than the Eurozone crisis was, the Grexit crisis, you name it, all of the financial issues they had. And I think the reason for that, even though it's economically the cost that the refugees will bear on Europe, they're significant. I've seen estimates up to 10 billion euros at this point, much less than we'll see in Greece. But the social fabric of Europe, the unwillingness to integrate mostly Muslim migrants, the likely backlash we will see both within individual European countries and also amongst them. And most worryingly, most concerningly, is what happens when violence spreads, when we see terrorist activity. Not as if I'm saying at all that I believe that most of the people that are coming over are bad eggs. I don't. But I certainly believe that in the same way that you have 8% of the French population is Muslim, and that's why you've seen so much more significant violence and terrorism in France. It's a combination of a large burgeoning refugee population that becomes citizens, they get asylum, but they do not integrate, and they're not integrated by French society. Nationalism in France is much more about cultural norms and values than it is about political ideology, and that's true across Europe. I think that when you see that in Germany you're going to have millions of refugees who may well be very necessary economically given German demographics and their economy, but they won't be integrated, they won't be accepted in German society, that's clearly going to lead to a very large disenfranchised minority population in Germany that will ultimately lead to social stresses and instability and violence. And I guess what worries me the most here is that the one thing we've been able to count on since the Eurozone crisis, since the financial crisis in 2008, was Angela Merkel's leadership, was the fact that the German chancellor was not only a strong leader for Germany, but was a strong leader for Europe as a whole. And I really don't think that's likely to hold true as this refugee crisis continues. I think the level of internal dissatisfaction and dissent with Merkel is going to grow, and that's going to undermine her ability to continue to be a strong European voice overall. To be very clear, this is set up to get much, much worse. Some 5% of Syria's 4.1 million refugees now reside in Europe, excepting Turkey. Most are in Turkey, 2 million plus, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and Egypt. But they're not going to stay there. They're going to go where there are economic opportunities, where there are social benefits, where there's the possibility of asylum. And clearly, this means that a deal that may be coming with 160,000 refugees being moved from poorer countries in Europe to wealthier countries, an extremely difficult deal to get done, is just the tip of the iceberg. We are not close to seeing this refugee crisis play out. Perhaps more disturbingly, and certainly much more problematically from a human perspective, is that the root causes of this crisis, looking at 4 failed states in the Middle East, most importantly Syria, with fully more than half of their population displaced, we're not close to policy success in that issue. The United States has made very clear that we're fighting ISIS and that Assad must go. Not only is Assad not going anywhere, but Russia is now militarily supporting Assad's regime in an unprecedented fashion on the ground. After the Iran deal has now been concluded, the Iranian government will be more assertive in supporting Assad as well. It's going to be very hard for the United States to back away from that policy, especially since Assad himself has done more to expand the civil war and lead to the refugees that we're now seeing across the region and in Europe. And yet, absent doing that, there's no possibility of ending this war. There's no possibility of a resolution that would lead to some kind of governance on the ground, stable governance on the ground in Syria. So I think you're going to be hearing an awful lot more in the headlines on the refugee crisis, an awful lot more for me. A final point, of course, for me is here in the United States. There not only is there an unwillingness to engage in strategy in Syria, either backing down and trying to work with the Europeans and the Russians to keep Assad and to have some form of agreement with other governing forces, but of course there's also no willingness to take a military solution. Absent that, just some bombing, which is hardly going to destroy either ISIS or Assad. Nor are the Americans taking on large numbers of refugees. A commitment of 10,000 from the United States, from the Obama administration, is vastly less than it needs to be, especially given American history and exceptionalism. This will bring to bear more American hypocrisy in foreign policy internationally. We've seen that for a long time. And we, of course, are talking about immigration issues in the U.S. We're talking about a wall with Mexico, which is hardly a priority issue for the Americans right now. In fact, Mexicans are coming over in much smaller numbers today than they were in the past 5-10 years. Chinese and Indian migrants are the largest numbers in the U.S., and we're not really talking about Syria. I don't expect that's going to change for the presidential election, but I certainly think this is going to be an expanded and very lasting crisis across the Middle East and into Europe. You may remember back in January, we listed Eurasia Group, the top risk for 2015. Number one was the politics of Europe. I wish I could go back and say that didn't pan out. You never want these risks to really happen, but it's pretty clear it was going to, and that's where we are today. The refugee crisis is the largest piece of that we've seen in 2015. So a few moments of musings for me, and again, I hope you found this interesting and worthwhile. If you have any comments on how you might like me to engage with this, the video portion of this technology going forward, I'd love to hear from you because I'm a bit of a novice. And otherwise, we will be in touch on this page. Thanks so much. Bye.